Hello, and welcome to our podcast, Beyond the Test, Strasz Talks. I'm Rory McCorkle, the VP of Business Development from Strasz Assessment Systems, and I'm excited about our topic today. We are going to be talking about the fearful topic of vendor selection and everything that goes into that for credentialing bodies. I'm really excited to have a wonderful guest to speak to this topic this week. Charles Glover. Charles is the Director of Certification and Assessment Products from SHRM. And Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rory. Happy to be here. And thank you for your patience as we got this scheduled.
Absolutely. Well, not a problem at all. We're just glad to have you on and excited to hear your wisdom here on this topic, knowing that you've been through this adventure a couple times. So
once or twice.
So, I'd love to start with the question that we always start with here, and that is, how did you find yourself in the testing and credentialing arena? So tell us about your career journey and what led you here.
Yeah, well, as I can imagine, it's not something you hear a lot of elementary school kids saying to themselves. So yeah, where along the way do we really find ourselves wanting to get invested in testing, knowing we grow up with tests our whole lives, and nobody ever really wants to do that as a career choice, I can imagine. But yeah, I would say not unlike many others. My introduction to IO psychology, which is my background, came about in my last year of undergrad. Actually, I took my intro to IO course and immediately fell in love with it. Before that, I was looking at the clinical psychology or abnormal psychology field. I really enjoyed working with people, but also the kind of the mechanics behind understanding things, which I feel like IO has a nice balance of. I will say, going into IO, I didn't really have a full appreciation for it until grad school. My dirty secret is that statistics was not my favorite thing at the time, and I realized very quickly when I got to graduate school, I was like, oh, this is extremely statistically of an investment, and I need to push through, and that's what I did. Along the way, and my grad school was out of Baltimore. We had a really good partnership with the Prometric group, not far down the street. And they had several folks that had come from the Baltimore program and had been working there, and they came to our graduate school to tell us about the wonderful world of testing. And I could not be less interested because, again, who wants to make a career out of building tests when we've spent our whole lives taking them? So I did not find that interesting whatsoever. My thought about my career path as I had progressed through graduate school was going to be in the consulting field. Mm-hmm. And so when I exited grad school, I didn't find a lot of opportunities. I had also had a lot of folks from my alma mater who were in the consulting field. And when we had talked about it, I'm like, this just doesn't sound right for me either. So my first role out of grad school was actually at an ergonomic research base. It was actually with the Army. I was a civilian contractor doing ergonomic research in Natick, Massachusetts, believe it or not. So I schlepped myself all the way up to the north and had a really great experience. Again, I think there was a lot of value and measurement and things that they were doing that tied into a lot of what testing is all about. So when I was ready to leave the cold of Massachusetts, there was an opportunity at Prometric, lo and behold. So I figured, might as well kind of take this to the next level and use what I've learned. And I have loved it ever since. I've been in the field for about 12 years now. And I've really enjoyed it. So I found my career home, so to speak. So the rest is history.
Oh, that's fantastic. And interestingly, a lot of parallels with how I started in my own career, Charles, because I also was going to go into clinical psychology. That was going to be my path before I pivoted. And of course, also was introduced to the profession through roles at Prometric. So there you go. I love the common background, man.
Awesome. Yeah. No.
It's great when organizations can develop those academic partnerships. To your point, it always expands the potential for others joining the field, which is fantastic as we try to continue to grow and replace those who are toward the end of their career. But let's talk about this subject of vendor selection. And of course, SHRM has quite a fair-sized program, to say the least. So, I know that this has been a continued process for you guys as the program was launched and expanded. Just generally, I would say, Charles, when you see organizations go into a vendor selection or an RFP process and struggle with that process, in your experience, from your observation, where do you see some of those root issues, with the vendor, with the lack of clarity on the organization's strategy requirements? What should organizations think about doing in terms of a reflection process, if you will, before actually going out to market?
Yeah, well, I like the way you kicked this off. This is definitely a tricky subject to navigate, and SHRM is not in any shortfall of vendor partnerships. I think at last count, we have at least 8 to 10 different vendors that we work with that comprise the holistic nature of our certification program, whether it's truly around the content or digital badging, translation, security, you name it. I think we've cornered the ICE or the ATP market on having a lot of vendor partnerships, which is fantastic for us. We love all of our vendors very much. But yes, to your point, vendor selection is not easy. And I think the burden truly lies on the client side. So again, before coming to SHRM, on having an appreciation for the vendor side and now a full appreciation on the client side, I really have to kind of play against my own team here and say, it's really up to the client, I think, to really not only understand what the kind of the survey landscape of the vendor suite looks like, but to your point, I think it's also inherently on the client side to understand what do I need, right? What do I need going into this? What about my program makes the vendor selection more attainable and more proper for me to think about? Where do I want to go? How many candidates do I have in my testing forecast? What kind of item banking qualities do I need? What kind of item development needs do I have? So really kind of mapping these things out ahead of time, ahead of really going out there and sourcing vendors is critical, because I think there is a lack of clarity. And I think a lot of times, in my experience, partnering with client groups when I was on the vendor side, a lot of the times they just don't really know. I don't think they really have a full appreciation for what we do in the testing industry day to day, and as it relates to their program, how to really navigate through the choices to make the most informed choice, again, in concert with both their needs and what's available. And I will say, too, I think this is such a rapidly evolving conversation now that AI has really blossomed, right? A lot of these kind of archetypal vendor offerings have changed so much. A lot of them are, immersing themselves in AI rapidly. A lot of them are expanding their capabilities. I remember at ATP, I was talking to a group, and they've really transformed themselves over the last year or 2 years to, from kind of what I would say more of a mid-sized group to kind of being a full suite of offerings, from JTAs all the way through standard setting and even some SME recruitment and tracking capabilities. So I think there's a lot of information to be gathered, and it's challenging. It's challenging the client side or the organization side to take stock of what all's out there. But really, it's up to them to define what success looks like. What is their strategy? Where are they now? Where do they want to be? Are they kind of more in the infantile stage, so to speak, of their program? Are they brand new? Are they looking to grow? Or are they more mature? Maybe they're looking for a different vendor. So a lot of this depends, right? It's a lot of factors to consider. But I think there are avenues for client groups to immerse themselves, right? We have all of our great conferences they can go to. They can come speak to us. There's a lot of information out there So it's really up to them, do their due diligence, and work a lot of this into their process before selecting or transitioning away from a vendor to a different one.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Charles. And I think you hit on something that's really important, and that is the due diligence before putting that RFP together. Whether it's working the exhibit hall, as you've mentioned, at an ICE or an ATP, or just having one-on-one conversations, right? Eliciting what's new with you, what's out there, what are you, to your point, without those conversations, at times it's very difficult, for organizations to even put that list of requirements together because you don't know the world of possibilities.
Right. Exactly.
I love you bringing that up, and I certainly can say, I wish those kind of conversations were something that occurred more regularly, and from the vendor perspective. So appreciate you bringing that up. Alongside, we pride ourselves in this industry of our collegial relationships and the way we do business. It's why I've continued to do this after 23 years. But many RFPs really do have that focus on features and functionality, candidate experience process, or test development process. What for you in your experience has been, maybe not something that's the headline on the RFP, but important factors for creating those partnerships, culture, governance, the way organizations, fundamentally operate, that really determine whether a relationship can be a successful one?
Yeah, great question. And I would say not something I would have learned early in my career. I think this is something that took a little while for me to mature, to understand, to your point, beyond the bells and whistles, right? Beyond the big ticket items, like you mentioned, features, right? Of course, everyone is interested in the features. The cost, right? Those are the big ticket items. It's I think of it like kind of buying a house for the first time. You go in, you do your walkthrough. Your concern is the kitchen and how many closets you have, and how many bathrooms you have, and all these kind of more so early visual cues that would prompt me to be interested. But nobody really looks at the lifespan of the water heater in the back closet to realize, maybe this investment wasn't as great as an opportunity as I thought it would. When you kind of get down the road and into the partnership, that's where the rubber really meets the road to keep the trains on the tracks, as we like to say. So yeah, to your point, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and this is not a knock, obviously, on the vendor side, right? They're here to make money. They're here to sell their products. They're here to forge a partnership, but a business partnership nonetheless. Again, I kind of go back to my earlier comment. I think it's really incumbent on these organizations to define more broadly and more deeply what it is beyond those kind of early, flashy, sexy things that are kind of part of our repertoire now in terms of what vendors can provide. I remember a lot of early things a couple of years ago when AI was really coming around. A lot of things that we would hear during these presentations at conferences is how many items we can develop, right? And that's great. But at the end of the day, I can't think of many clients, if at all, that need 10,000 items to be developed, unless you're really standing up a program. So there's a lot of some of these things that really sound neat and really sound cool and really, really want to make you kind of jump into that RFP process quickly. But to your point, I think there's more that we need to align around, things like kind of this cultural alignment, right? Who are we as a client and who are you as a vendor? And are we really going to understand and partner together beyond just kind of the service level, right? Trust is another big one. Had a conversation with another group about trust, and that's where I found that SHRM, as we've matured, are really looking for in a partnership. It's hard to write that out in an RFP, but we have to create some boundaries around that. And I think, again, kind of going back to who is the client in this case? Are we somebody that's in growth mode? Are we looking to expand? What are we looking for to grow into in the future? Is our candidate population going to grow immensely? Are we going to need more forms? Are we going to need new kind of more pilot items? Are we going to advance into something more of like a loft or a computer adaptive test format, whereas right now we're doing fixed forms, and can these vendor groups that we're looking for support that? Yes or no? So again, some of these things are kind of inherent in the discussions about the RFP in terms of the technical capabilities, but I think there's a lot of kind of soft areas as well that need to be aligned on more closely for this to truly be a success. Otherwise, we're going to get into some gritty conversations on who owns what, and if there's a problem, let's say there's a security breach, who does what, who's the burden of ownership for that going to be on, and having those discussions kind of mapped out, laid out, and understood ahead of time, I think really just makes the future nature of these agreements and partnerships much more fruitful, because everyone walks in understanding what's expected of them.
Charles, I love you bringing up that example there toward the end of your comment, because it does go back to the trust element. And I actually think through, some of the more, let's say, effective procurement processes that I've engaged in over the years, where they've actually gone into, say, like their risk matrix, and they've asked about a couple that they view as most likely, and how would that be handled? And it did set such a different tone with regard to trust and transparency, because you do have to, actually think through, okay, what if this particular worst case happens, and how would it be handled? So no, love you bringing that up.
We need to incorporate like a what if section to these RFPs and these agreements, just to account for the things that we don't even anticipate coming, but inevitably with the changes in technology and the environment of testing are soon to be kind of at our doorsteps. So it's almost hard to predict everything that will happen, but it's changed for us, and we've encountered some things that we didn't anticipate. And that's been kind of eye-opening for us to really not only just kind of rely on the process to play out the way it has, but really to get kind of ahead of it and say, okay, we need to kind of consider all of these different avenues that we could go down, and what's our fallback position going to be?
Sure. No, I really appreciate that mention. And I think that kind of, gaming out type exercise is really effective to engage in. Well, you've mentioned, of course, SHRM has a very particular vendor ecosphere, partially driven because of your size and complexity. But since our industry has moved to computer-based testing, and probably even before, but there's always been this debate about kind of single provider usage, that quote unquote full service partner, versus a more diverse vendor ecosystem. And obviously you all have gone down one pathway. From your perspective, what are the pros, what are the trade-offs, and how should organizations really take a look at what model is going to best fit them?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I hate to use this as my default as always, but I think a lot of it simply depends, right? So I'll kind of try to walk through SHRM as an anecdote, and then hopefully kind of give some credibility to other choices as well, knowing we've gone squarely down the road of having many different vendors in our ecosphere. So when we started, we certainly had fewer vendors. It was really separated purely by item development, psychometrics, and administrations, right? So I think that's kind of the triad, right? You got your development vendor, you got your psychometrics. Sometimes they're married together, which is very much the norm these days. And then your administration vendor might be, depending on, again, your testing program, right? So it depends. Mm-hmm. So do you need more of a global lens on your program, or is it more localized to a specific country or region in that case? So a lot of those things really depend. Along the way, we started to consolidate, right? It makes it easier when you have a single vendor, mainly for accountability and just kind of the streamlined nature of the process, right? The more vendors you have, the more handoffs you have. It's harder to align the schedules, right? You got different groups kind of prioritizing their own vendor relationships, and then you have to kind of bring them all together, which is, sometimes tricky in and of itself to align all these different vendor groups to your schedule as the client, and then launch the exam for your candidates to take. So I think there are pros and cons ultimately with both. So I mentioned some of them, again, in the nature of having kind of a straightforward, simplistic one size kind of fits all, which a lot of vendors I've seen are moving into that model. I kind of notated one of the groups I met with at ATP, where they've really brought a lot of the capabilities that used to be kind of segmented in-house. And that's really been interesting to see. So I think there are opportunities now where a lot of groups are kind of doing that same thing. Whereas before it was, this is our shtick, right? We're a psychometric consulting group. That's really what we're going to do. We don't want to play in these other areas. This is what we're known for. This is what we're comfortable with. So I think there's some of that kind of ballooning of possibilities now. But some groups are remaining that way, and that's totally fine. We've now shifted out of that kind of single model into, we're going to have lots of different vendors because I think as a mature program, we can see the inherent value in having a really strong bench of vendors that are known and reputable for doing what they're good at, right? And having gone through this process many times with these RFPs and kind of, I like to say, kind of stitching it all together in the background to ensure, right, that nothing's going to break along the way, or there's not going to be, some kind of fault line where we realize now we can't, API this data over here into this system to then launch the test. So that's a really strong point of consideration if a group is going to go down this multi-vendor model to ensure that everyone's going to play nice in the sandbox once all the ink is dry on these contracts, for sure. I think a lot of it, again, kind of goes back to what I've suggested a couple of times. Really, if you're more of an entry, you're kind of getting into the certification space, or you're new, I would say the simple model, right, is having one vendor that kind of does the heavy lifting on multiple fronts, is really the way to go. Again, as the client learning about the testing world or just kind of being the liaison for it, it makes your point of contacts easier, right? You don't have to kind of learn what they do, and then it gets all jumbled up. It's nice to just kind of have one cohesive workflow, taking into account the holistic nature of what they're doing. But again, as groups get more mature and their needs change, and you're looking toward more of a future landscape versus I'm in the immediate need where I need to build a program and launch it, it makes more sense for some of those mature programs to have maybe more vendors that specialize in certain things that can support you in those unique ways. But again, you just got to make sure they all play nice together.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more on the play nice piece. And I think also, to your point there, Charles, if you're a group that is going to have a more diverse vendor landscape, identifying, have you worked with these folks before? What right. Client was that with, right? Trying to establish that baseline goes a long way to seeing whether there is a good existing relationship and how that's worked for clients that have actually leveraged that. So I love that mention of ensuring the ecosystem is indeed cogent.
Yeah, totally. And I think another kind of layer to this that I've seen along the way more recently than not is the kind of adaptability of vendors to offer more of like an a la carte kind of offering, rather than, if you partner with us, you're going to buy it all, whether you need it all or not. It's an all-in-one solution, and and we're going to jot you down for 5 years or 3 years or however long. So what I've seen now too, and again, encouraging all the client groups out there to do their homework, is to see, what do you need from a vendor support level? Some of the things they might want to do in-house. So for example, we do all of our subject matter recruiting in-house, but we do partner with a vendor that allows us to store data and track data in their system. We also do a lot of our facilitation of our workshops in-house. So that used to be a very central part to the partnership, is that we're going to do everything for you as the vendor. You can be on the calls or not. You can support as much as you want, but the burden is on the vendor to do everything. So now it's become, from what we've seen, is what do you need? And we're going to make this as easy for you to tee up, the components of the project work that you need for us to do. Anything that you want to do as the client organization, we'll work with you. Having more of a dual street opportunity to say, have to do everything for you, but there is a level of concern there. Again, if you're not familiar with the process or you're not ready for that. But I think it's nice that from the client side that there is more flexibility, more adaptability in the vendor space.
I couldn't agree more. And to that point, I also remember far too well when I've been on your side of the house, the importance of owning that SME relationship within especially a volunteer pool as large as SHRM's, to say the least. Well, as we look toward closing here, and also as we look to the future within the next several years, obviously, I'm sure AI is going to be one of these elements since we've already hit it amply. But what capabilities do you really see organizations, your peers and credentialing bodies, what should they be prioritizing with regard to vendors to ensure that they don't get outpaced, that their solutions don't get out of date, so on and so forth?
Well, I'll save AI for last in this case. So yeah, I think there's a lot. Again, I've seen the testing industry transform more so over the last 2-3 years than I have the prior decade ahead of that. So first and foremost, I think a lot of what we need to do collectively, clients and vendor groups, is really step into this area of almost uncomfortable flexibility, right? There's a lot of reactions. There's a lot of reactivity right now, and AI is a major component of that. Flexibility in the sense of staying ahead and being, everyone wanting to kind of bubble up to the top and be a leader in the space, whether it's a thought leader or an industry leader or a technological leader in the space. And I think that really kind of pushes the boundaries for all of us collectively to really realize what is the art of the possible, not only in terms of technology, but data. SHRM has really invested our program around different data points, not only the typical, kind of what are our survivability rates for our pilot items and things like that, but also data around our candidate populations. What more can we do to gain insights into who are our testers and what can we do to support them? I know sometimes that almost becomes an afterthought in the industry, is we got them to test, right? That's what we really wanted them to do, and that's all we really care about. And then build the next test for the next group. But we found a lot of value in dissecting kind of our candidate data to understand what their needs are and how to help them be successful as much as possible, right? In the realm of fairness and mitigating bias and everything like that. I think that's really kind of an untapped conversation. Now, I've heard it more and more recently at some of these conferences that I've attended. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there for the vendor and the client to partner together on data and share insights to really, again, if you're trying to build your program or take your program in a different direction, because AI has kind of monopolized a lot of what your current or historical knowledge base was, and now you have to completely pivot to a new area. What does that look like, right? And that's going to really impact your candidate volume. So having a focus on that, I think, is really something that we all need to collectively do. Security, again, easy one, but also often overlooked until you have a security breach, right? It's always too late when you start thinking about security. But with the advent of AI, it's becoming easier and easier for folks to get into where they shouldn't be and harvest items and take them and run with them. I had a conversation. Actually, I gave a presentation at ATP. We had a breach. SHRM had a breach 2 years ago. 2 consecutive breaches, window to window. That was not a fun time for us. And
I would think not.
Yeah. And to my own point, we didn't realize we were in any kind of security lacking capabilities until it happened to us.
Yeah.
So we had to pivot on a dime and really make a lot of difficult organizational business decisions that obviously impacted our vendor agreements at the time. So we had a lot of kind of turmoil. But again, things are going to change 3 to 5 years down the road. So really having our finger on the pulse collectively around what security looks like is critical. And again, just kind of getting back to the nature of AI, right? I mean, we've been in this for not that long as an industry, has really kind of taken over for us. So I would say we're still in the growing pains years of AI. I think we're still finding what the capabilities are. I always think back to when it was very prominent early on at the conferences. It was always very, I like to say it was Mad Libby, right? It was very much like I'm filling out a Mad Lib and the AI is going to plug in words here and it's gonna give me something. Now it's completely transformed where, you know, we got it hooked up to ChatGPT and Claude, and it's got this amazing natural language processing in it, and it's developing these beautiful scenarios. So it's really changed rapidly, and I can't imagine for other item types where, you know, you got your hotspot and, you know, other things that are more sophisticated, and even now kind of getting into the really robust gamification world and almost using AI as a prompt to have kind of an essay-esque, you know, scoring model. So there's this kind of untapped future that's ahead of us all. And I think we're all going to find that we're going to adapt to it, whether we want to or not. So kind of going back to my earlier point, I think really the next 3 to 5 years is going to be defined by our ability to be flexible and agile in this space, and just, it's going to come whether we want to or not. So let's just buckle up and adapt and make sure we're all ready for it, because it's going to be here. But it's exciting, I think, at the same time for both vendors and client groups to really maximize the needs, right? The needs of our candidates, because they're all competing against AI, right? A lot of them are needing to prove themselves as competent, as knowledgeable, as human beings, against, you know, the fears that AI is going to come take your job, which is something we talk a lot about in the AI and the HR space. So using our credential as momentum to assist individuals and support them through their career journeys is extremely important and top of mind, as I can imagine for other groups as well.
I couldn't agree more, and I would say chalk that last point up, that flexibility and you know, the degree to which someone is preparing to react to what's coming up. That's one of those critical cultural elements that we you know, we hit on earlier to assess. So I could not agree more, Charles. Well, I want to thank you so much. You know, thank you for sharing your journey. And you know, particularly how, you know, your experience at SHRM has you know, really expanded and you know, also transformed your view of the vendor community as you've engaged with so many in this space. Really appreciate it.
Very much appreciate you too, Rory.
Well, and to all of you who have hung in and listened to the full episode, thank you very much for your time. We hope you got a lot out of Charles's comments here. We will be posting a new podcast episode in just a couple of weeks, so please do be on the lookout for that. And in the meantime, be safe and be well. Thank you.